I never imagined that walking into a company lobby for the first time could feel like stepping into a new life. But that morning 5 years ago, when I pushed through the revolving glass doors of Sterling and Pierce, it felt exactly like that. The lobby was buzzing with energy men and women in tailored suits, moving briskly, their shoes clicking on marble floors, polished to a mirror shine. There was the faint smell of espresso from the cafe tucked in the corner, blending with the sharp tang of floor cleaner. And hanging from the high ceiling was a massive abstract painting, the kind that was supposed to scream, "This is where big things happen." I was 26, fresh out of grad school, and desperate to prove that all the sleepless nights and endless student loans had been worth something. My parents had worked blue-collar jobs their entire lives. My dad drove trucks, my mom worked part-time as a cashier. They never had the chance to climb corporate ladders or sit in boardrooms with glass walls. But they believed in me, and when I told them I had landed a position as a junior financial analyst at Sterling and Pierce, I saw pride in their eyes that I had never seen before. That was enough to fuel me. I promised myself I wouldn't waste the opportunity. The early days were a blur of spreadsheets late nights and trying not to look clueless in meetings. I learned quickly that in this office, appearances mattered almost as much as results. You didn't just do the work, you had to look like you belonged. And I wanted more than anything to belong. My boss back then, Mr. Kessler, told me during my first week in this business, loyalty counts. People who stick around and keep their heads down get rewarded. People who rock the boat don't last long. At the time, I took it as good advice. I thought he was warning me against arrogance, against thinking I knew everything, but in hindsight, I realized it was something else. It was a coded message about survival, about learning when to stay quiet, when to let things slide. Still, I thrived. I earned praise for my attention to detail, my willingness to stay until midnight, my ability to untangle the messiest financial reports. Promotions followed one step at a time. By my 4th year, I was leading a small team. By my 5th, I had been trusted with accounts worth hundreds of millions. Yet even as my career grew, something inside me began to shift. I noticed little things at first, tiny discrepancies in reports numbers that didn't quite line up, decisions made in hushed tones behind closed doors. But I brushed them off. After all, I was still the outsider who had grown up in a working-class home, now dining at steakhouses with executives who never had to worry about overdraft fees. Who was I to question the system that had finally let me in? And so I kept my head down. I told myself loyalty meant patience, that good things came to those who waited. But deep down, I felt the first stirrings of doubt, the kind you bury under ambition, because admitting it would mean risking everything you've worked for. I didn't know it yet, but that doubt was the spark that would eventually set fire to everything. The first time I realized something was seriously wrong, it was late on a Tuesday night. The office was almost empty. The cleaning crew had already started vacuuming the hallways, and the city lights outside cast long, eerie shadows across the desks. I was going through quarterly reports, double-checking numbers that never seemed to balance, when I noticed a pattern. It wasn't just a typo or a miscalculation. It was deliberate. Expenses had been shifted, revenue exaggerated. A loss had been turned into a gain with nothing more than a few clever accounting tricks. At first, I thought maybe I was overthinking it. Everyone made mistakes. Maybe someone on another team had rushed through the numbers. But the deeper I looked, the less it felt like an accident. I remember leaning back in my chair, staring at the glowing screen, and feeling that slow, cold realization creep over me. This isn't sloppy work, this is fraud. The next morning, I brought it up carefully with my manager, trying to sound neutral, like I was just asking a question. He didn't even glance at the papers in my hand. Instead, he gave me a tight smile and said, "Numbers are flexible. Don't get too hung up on details." Focus on what your job is, not what isn't. Something in his tone made my stomach twist. It wasn't advice, it was a warning. Over the next few weeks, I started noticing more. Financial forecasts adjusted in ways that made no sense. Contracts signed with partners I had never heard of for projects that never seemed to materialize. Even the culture around me began to feel different. Conversations hushed when I walked into rooms. Meetings ended just as I arrived. People I'd known for years suddenly looked at me like I didn't belong. The turning point came during a team meeting in the executive boardroom. The CFO was presenting results to a group of senior managers. Slide after slide showed glowing profits, rising growth, everything looking flawless. And yet I knew, because I had seen the raw data, that it was a carefully constructed illusion. I remember staring at the screen, the polished graphs and bright green arrows pointing upward, and feeling this sharp conflict inside me. Part of me wanted to stand up right then to say, "This isn't real. You're lying to everyone in this room." But another part, the part that had spent years clawing my way into this company, told me to keep quiet, to stay safe. That night, lying awake in bed, I thought about my parents again, about how hard they had worked so I could sit in that boardroom. Would speaking up mean throwing all of it away, or would staying silent mean betraying everything they had sacrificed for me? The weight of that choice sat heavy on my chest. It was the first time I understood the trap of loyalty. Sometimes it doesn't protect you. Sometimes it suffocates you. I didn't know how deep it went yet or how dangerous it would become. But I knew one thing for certain: Sterling and Pierce wasn't what it claimed to be. And I couldn't unsee the truth anymore. By the end of that quarter, my unease had hardened into something sharper: suspicion. And with suspicion came responsibility. I tried to bury it at first. I told myself I was just a mid-level manager, that I didn't have the full picture, that maybe I was missing some explanation only the higher-ups could see. But every time I opened another spreadsheet or cross-checked a transaction, the same ugly truth stared back at me. The company wasn't bending the rules, it was breaking them. Then, one Friday afternoon, as I was wrapping up before the weekend, an envelope slid across my desk. No name, no note, just a thin packet of documents inside. I opened it and froze. It was a set of internal memos and emails that confirmed everything I had feared. Senior leadership wasn't just aware of the fake numbers. They were orchestrating it. Deliberately, systematically, and with full knowledge of the risk. My hands shook as I flipped through page after page. It was all their instructions to manipulate forecasts, directives to hide losses, even names of shell companies being used to funnel money. Someone inside the company had decided I needed to see this. For hours, I sat at my desk, long after everyone else had left, staring at those papers, feeling the walls of my world closing in. What was I supposed to do? If I stayed silent, I'd be complicit. I'd be just another cog turning the wheels of corruption. But if I spoke up, if I exposed this, my career could end overnight. This wasn't some petty office scandal. This was the kind of fraud that ruined reputations, that drew government investigations, that sent people to prison. And then there was the personal cost. I had rent, student loans, a life I'd built brick by brick. I had worked too hard to throw it all away. But I also had a conscience. I thought about my father, who had spent decades on the road driving 18-wheelers, never once cutting corners. About my mother, who used to count every penny at the grocery store so we could make it through the week. What would they say if they knew I had discovered the truth and chose to stay quiet? The decision weighed on me like an anchor. That weekend, I drove out of the city and sat by Lake Michigan, staring at the horizon until the sun went down. The wind was cold, the kind that cut through your coat, but I barely felt it. I kept replaying the same two outcomes in my mind: stay silent, stay safe, and carry the guilt forever. Or speak up, risk everything, and maybe lose it all. I didn't know which path I would choose yet. but I knew I was standing on the edge of something irreversible. And deep down, I could feel it the moment of choice was coming. The walls were closing in, and soon there would be no place left to hide. The day of the quarterly shareholders' meeting arrived with the kind of tension you can almost taste. Everyone in the office was on edge. Executives darted down hallways, assistants juggled last-minute printouts, and the boardroom was prepped like a stage set for a performance. The company was about to parade its record-breaking growth, and everyone knew their role in the show. Everyone except me. I sat in the back of the boardroom clutching a small black flash drive like it was a live grenade. Inside was everything the doctored spreadsheets, the hidden contracts, the emails that proved senior leadership had built their empire on lies. For weeks I had gone back and forth. Was I willing to risk my career, my reputation, even my safety? But when I pictured the people who would lose everything if this fraud continued, the employees, the investors, even my own team who trusted me, I knew silence was no longer an option. The meeting began. The CFO clicked through slide after slide of glossy graphs and green arrows pointing up. Applause scattered through the room. Smiles flashed. It was all theater. My heart pounded so loudly I wondered if people could hear it. When the applause died down, I stood. My legs felt like concrete, but I forced myself to move. "Excuse me," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "Before we continue, I have something to present." Heads turned. Confused murmurs rippled across the room. I walked to the front, ignoring the burning glare of my manager. I plugged the flash drive into the projector. And then the truth filled the screen. Line by line, number by number, the illusion unraveled. Losses disguised as profits. Emails with direct orders to falsify records. Shell companies traced straight back to board members' names. The silence in the room was suffocating, broken only by the clicking of the projector as each slide appeared. Finally, the CEO slammed his fist on the table. "Turn that off." Now I met his eyes. "You told us loyalty mattered. But loyalty to what? To a lie, to covering for theft. You don't understand what you're doing," he growled. "You'll destroy us all." "No," I said, my voice rising. "You destroyed this company the moment you decided numbers were more important than integrity. All I'm doing is showing the truth." The room erupted. Some executives shouted, demanding I be removed. Others sat frozen pale, realizing the walls were collapsing around them. Shareholders whispered furiously, phones already buzzing as they forwarded the evidence. Security was called. 2 guards stepped in, but by then it was too late. The truth was out, and it couldn't be shoved back into the shadows. As I was escorted out, I caught a glimpse of the boardroom one last time. The once polished executives now looked like cornered animals, their empire cracking beneath them. And for the first time in weeks, I felt something like peace. Because the choice was made. There was no turning back. The next morning, my inbox was already gone, wiped clean by IT. My badge no longer opened the front doors of Sterling and Pierce. Overnight, I had gone from rising star to persona non grata. But the world outside the glass towers hadn't gone silent. In fact, it was louder than ever. By mid-morning, headlines were splashed across financial news sites, Sterling and Pierce under investigation for massive accounting fraud. Anonymous whistleblower exposes $500 scandal. Anonymous. That word made me laugh bitterly. Anyone who had been in that boardroom yesterday knew exactly who had pressed play on those slides. At first, I thought I'd feel nothing but fear. Fear of lawsuits, fear of being blacklisted, fear of walking into a grocery store and seeing my face on the evening news. But what surprised me most was the silence inside me. After months of doubt, sleepless nights, and moral paralysis, there was a strange calm in finally being honest. Still, the fallout was brutal. My phone buzzed constantly with calls I didn't answer, Reporters, old coworkers, even friends from grad school I hadn't spoken to in years. Social media lit up with speculation. Some called me brave, others called me reckless naive, a career suicide case. Meanwhile, Sterling and Pierce was crumbling in real time. Shareholders demanded emergency meetings. The SEC opened an inquiry. Several executives took leave within 48 hours, though everyone knew what that meant. The company's stock plummeted, wiping out millions in market value. I watched it all unfold from the small apartment I'd worked so hard to afford, sitting cross-legged on the couch, with my laptop open refreshing news feeds like a compulsion. Part of me wanted to cheer. Part of me wanted to cry. Mostly, I just felt empty, because while the truth was finally out, the cost was clear too. My career in corporate finance was over. No Fortune 500 firm would touch me now. I had broken the unspoken rule of the corporate world: don't air the family's dirty laundry. That Sunday, I ran into one of my old colleagues at a cafe near the Loop. She looked at me like she wasn't sure whether to hug me or walk the other way. Finally, she said quietly, "You did what all of us wished we could have done. We just didn't have the guts." Her words stayed with me. For the first time, I realized this wasn't just about me losing a job. It was about showing everyone in that office, everyone trapped in the same system, that silence wasn't the only option. The scandal was no longer mine to carry alone. It was a storm, and it had already broken open. And in that storm, there was the faintest sense of something else, something I hadn't felt in months. Relief. The week after the boardroom confrontation felt strangely quiet, almost hollow, like the storm had finally passed but left the air too still. My name had already been scrubbed from Sterling and Pierce's directory. My access badge disabled, my email erased as if I had never existed there at all. For years, that company had been my world, my proving ground, my second home, and now it was just another glass tower downtown that I could only pass by on the street. At first, the silence was deafening. My days, once filled with back-to-back meetings and endless spreadsheets, were suddenly empty. I found myself waking up early still in work mode, only to realize there was nowhere I had to be. For a while, I sat in that emptiness, wondering if I had made the biggest mistake of my life. But slowly, something shifted. I wasn't running to catch trains or staring at glowing screens until midnight. I was sitting at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee that actually stayed warm. I was walking through the park in the middle of the day, noticing how the light hit the leaves. The world, which had once narrowed down to quarterly reports and boardroom politics, began to feel wide again. One evening, I pulled out my old sketchbook. It had been buried in the back of a closet for years, relic of the person I was before corporate life consumed me. At first, I didn't draw, I just wrote. Page after page of scattered thoughts, lessons learned, half-formed reflections. About loyalty, about fear, about the cost of silence and the strange freedom of finally speaking up. It wasn't polished or pretty, but it was mine. That sketchbook became my anchor. Not a resume, not a performance review, not a LinkedIn endorsement, just my words, raw and unfiltered. For the first time in years, I felt like I was telling my own story instead of living inside someone else's. The fallout from Sterling and Pierce continued to ripple through the news. Executives' resigned lawsuits mounted, the company's glossy image crumbled. And though my name wasn't in the headlines, I knew people remembered. Some probably cursed me for bringing it all down. Others maybe felt braver knowing someone had stood up. But I'd stopped checking the news every hour. It wasn't my burden to carry anymore. I thought often about my parents, about how my father never cut corners, how my mother pinched pennies, but always chose honesty over convenience. They hadn't raised me to climb corporate ladders at any cost. They had raised me to know right from wrong, even when it hurt. And in that sense, I hadn't failed them. Eventually, I began to imagine a different future. Not one defined by titles or promotions, but by using what I had lived through by writing, by speaking, maybe by helping others who felt trapped the way I once did. Because what I learned is this: the world doesn't change when we stay quiet. It only changes when someone is willing to say the thing everyone else is afraid to admit. Now when I pass the glass towers of downtown, I don't feel bitterness. I feel gratitude. That place tested me, and in losing it, I found something I hadn't realized: I'd lost my own voice. And whenever I talk to someone younger, an intern, a student, even a friend, I tell them the lesson I carried out of that boardroom: your voice matters more than their comfort. Don't let fear write your story.